seconds, but I just want to give some like preliminary instructions for the panel. Just want to recognize this is a safe space. Please feel free to share your thoughts, your opinions without backlash of whatever you have to say. Your opinions and thoughts matter in this space. Also, we're going to do introductions. Introduce, yourself, where you're from, the institution that you are, your major, your current major, and kind of like your goals and inspirations, and some of the campus activities that you're a part of. And so in no particular order, I'll just see who's on my list here. Andrew, let's start with you.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. I am currently a junior at Kennesaw State University. I'm a history and political science double major. I currently serve as the Secretary General for CHSS's, that's the College of Humanities and Social Sciences, HSMUN Secretary General. I also, now I keep having to remind myself, I previously served as the Treasurer of SJ, now I'm Vice President of the organization. Thank you all for having me here, and I'm very happy to discuss this panel, or be a panelist.
Congratulations, Andrew. Well deserved.
Thank you.
Great. Let's go with Aisha.
Hi, everyone. My name is Aisha Baldwin. I am a recent graduate of Spelman College. While I was at Spelman, I served as one of the sustainability interns for the school. And since graduating, I've taught for a school whose mission was to serve students with learning differences. And I'm currently serve as one of the pod organizers for the youth conference Powership, which is a conference whose goal is to bring together youth from all over the world and build skills to fight climate justice and to fight climate change and the social injustices that we have today.
Yeah, go on, Aisha. Yes. All right, thank you so much. Let's go with Austin Hiller.
Hi, thank you for having me. I am a second-year student at Kennesaw State University. I previously served this past school year as a senator for the College of Humanities and Social Sciences for our Student Government Association. Currently, I'm a team lead under Sim Lean for our civic engagement team at Kennesaw State University. I serve as a resident assistant for first-year students on campus as well. Future goals, hopefully State House and then Congress, so we can get some very big policy changes across the nation for a more sustainable future.
Yeah. And last but not least, Mama.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mama. I'm a senior here at Kennesaw State University. I'm a political science major. I currently am an AmeriCorps member. I work in education. I have spent time actually under SIM as well at Kennesaw State University. I was an OWL Leadership Fellow where we focused on the 17 Sustainability and Development Goals as well. I also work with a group of high school students. We focus on opioid addiction and mental health and things of that nature. Future goals, I'm really interested in education policy. So after I graduate in the summer, that's kind of the next step for me in advocating for change in education.
Wow, great group of panelists here. And so thank you all for just accepting the call to just kind of have a discussion about finances. I kind of put the description of what we'll be discussing overall. And these questions by no means, share your experiences, share outside experiences if you have to. And I'll specifically call on someone to answer specific questions, but if you want to tag in and be like, hey, I have a say here, please do so. I did not introduce myself. My name is Sim Lee, go by Sim. I work at Kennesaw State University as the program coordinator for leadership and civic engagement. Also serve as the RCE Atlanta Youth Engagement, one of the leads in our leadership circle. I am currently also a full-time PhD student, getting my doctor's degree in international conflict management. I have a passion to do diplomacy work, but advocate for women and children around the world. But my dissertation is focused on implementing peace building and peacekeeping initiatives in Haiti and including women in that initiative. Long mouthful. So I do enjoy enjoy working in sustainability. It's just the way forward, especially for our future generation, for us now and our future generation. So without further ado, let's hit on the first question, and I'll have Austin talk about what has been your experience with COVID-19 and balancing finances as a student or recent graduate.
So yeah, it's been different. We were kind of, I say, evacuated out of Kennesaw last March. It was really short notice. We all thought that it was a very short, like, let's leave for an extended spring break. We were all kind of actually excited to leave. And then we never came back until the fall. So finances was a little different. It was very hard to navigate on my own. My parents are stationed overseas right now. So it was very difficult to get refund information over the phone from Virginia. That's where I was. The closest family I had was in Virginia. So it was definitely a struggle trying to communicate with the university of I can't just come pick up the check or have it mailed. And so the only struggle was definitely getting the housing refund and some of the tuition refund information from the school. Just because I wasn't in the state, it did make it a very harder process to deal with.
Yeah. Anyone else would like to kind of share your experiences in balancing finances as a student specifically? I'm picking on someone. Aisha, come from a perspective from a recent graduate.
Yeah, so as a recent graduate, life has been life with COVID has been challenging. I would say definitely a change in family dynamics. COVID has, I've lost 2 family members that's been pretty close to me since COVID, and that just changed family dynamics in general. And so when the family dynamics change, also the finances look different as well. So now I feel that I have a greater sense of responsibility in my family. So balancing that as well as becoming financially independent as well it's been a challenge.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your experience. Andrew, as a student in the 21st century, you have to pay increasing average tuition rates each year. How do you believe the pandemic has affected students' ability to remain in school and succeed? And with your experience with being the treasurer for SGA, I would love to hear your perspective.
So I'll just, I don't want to ramble, but I'll start with at least with personal experience. I would say, well, I don't know if lucky is the right word, but just with family circumstances, I've been eligible for Pell Grants and I've been eligible for Hope as well. So that has taken much of the burden off on myself. And one thing that I've noticed is that a lot of students have struggled. They sort of straddle that line between in need or needy, just with the way that those rules are very, very stringent between whether or not people are actually eligible for Pell Grant. And so a lot of them do end up having to take out a lot of student loans or end up having to move back in with their parents. And that's just a thing that I've noticed a lot. People just having to scale things back, essentially, here on campus. That has been a significant concern, and even at least within my capacity as treasurer, because we work specifically with the different student organizations on campus. They've just had to scale everything back. There's a student advisory board that essentially will sign off on student funding. There's just things that we can't fund just because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And it's been very, very difficult for students on campus, to say the least. And that's a struggle that a lot of people have been dealing with.
How do you prioritize the choices whether or not to accept funding for a group or not?
So we have a protocol manual. So typically we follow the bit by bit, just the different portions that say, oh, we can fund this, we can fund this. With the COVID-19 pandemic, travel is a big, big source of funding that students will have to that will have to go through this body to essentially get approval for travel funding. And we just can't fund that. There was a moratorium that was put on travel all the way up to USG. And that's like a bit of big thing that like student organizations have had to deal with, where essentially they just haven't been able, because a lot of student organizations travel, they have to go around, essentially get KSU's name out there. They can't do that now until the travel moratorium is lifted. I believe July 1st now is when it's actually going to be first lifted.
Thank you. How about you? As a student and now you working in an education system with students who are potentially applying for college and you going towards a higher education degree, how do you believe this pandemic has affected students' ability to remain in school or even apply to come to school?
Yeah, so I would say like personally, the year, like I've had Zell and Hope and stuff like that. So that like Andrew said, it's really helped in lifting off a lot of the burden. But the year that like COVID came, my parents started making too much money. So the Pell Grant, I lost that, and it kind of forced me to think about the students who are in that situation. That's a lot of funding that they no longer have for things like housing or food or whatever excess costs the Hope Scholarship or Zell Miller doesn't cover. So that has been a little bit of a burden. And then like at the same time, like, jobs like everywhere closed down. So like you can't just get up and like go back to your job because you don't have access to it in the same way. But in terms of the students that I work with, I think I've definitely seen effects for them in terms of finances. A lot of the kids, like you can just tell that they're just very distracted, like because of things like money or just conversations that I've had with them. They've said things like, their parents are struggling a little bit here. And so it's really shifted the focus from being able to learn and like gain a quality education to how am I going to be able to provide for my daily needs. Yeah.
That is reality for a lot of us here. And so just sharing, even after you all graduate, even postgraduate, trying to acquire jobs, internships, these COVID-19 has definitely shifted the trajectory. Did your place of work get affected by the pandemic? If so, how? And you all can share. I'll start with Austin. And then.
Yes, for sure. I worked a couple roles on campus last semester. So I used to be a student assistant for our campus services department. That role, when I came back in the fall, was definitely a different, like completely different role than when I left in the spring of 2020. We came back and all of our events looked very different. Event setup was different. Basically, my training that I had received and been working for a year with the department was not useless, but utterly completely altered for a pandemic semester for fall of 20. Our events were different. Student energy was different. Just all of it. And from a resident assistant perspective, we just really can't do anything with students like in person. And if it is, it's very, very, very small scale. Our work for the beginning of part when we came in the fall, the first few weeks of school was definitely just managing cancellations. So we saw record cancellations, people not expecting their entire schedule to be online. A lot of students, when they got accepted in the spring and summer, when they registered, assumed that the fall would be normal. Obviously, that didn't happen. And so when they got here in the fall, we had record cancellations. Half my floor was uninhabited for a second. So that's definitely been a big, big adjustment for work on campus.
Aisha, what about you? Even when you were in college or after, did your workplace of work change?
The pandemic hit while I was finishing up a fellowship in Louisiana. So after that fellowship, I was applying to teaching opportunities, and I started teaching this past, well, in August. And I would say that teaching during the pandemic was probably the most difficult thing that I have ever done. And I taught little ones. And if you know anything about little kids, they are the carriers of germs. So it was a challenge, and it made me think about my health. I thought about my health a lot. So I would go into work thinking about my health and, of course, thinking about their health as well. But I felt that as a teacher, there was a lot of burdens. And I will also say that I felt that teachers weren't, everyone knows that teachers are incredibly underpaid, and I just felt like there wasn't really a safety net for us. So I would say that the working as a teacher during the pandemic is difficult. And we were also, I should mention that we were in person. Like I wasn't teaching online. I was teaching in a classroom with students. Um, so it was hard. It was very hard.
Thank you for sharing. Andrew, did your place of work change?
Most definitely. I touched on it before, just with the HSMUN conference. So just as like a quick point of clarification. So HSMUN is essentially, if you did MUN in high school, it's like one of the circuits. There's like a circuit around the state of Georgia where different conferences are hosted for high schoolers with the different universities. KSU is one of those, UGA is another, state, tech, etc. This was the first time in HSMUN's, I think, now 36-year history where we had to move things online and have a clearly just totally virtual conference. That was definitely a struggle. Most of the people that I had working under me as like directors and ADs, it was a process of training them how to work Zoom, what to expect, in particular when like they're running their committees individually throughout come the conference date. That was a real struggle, at least working on that through like a year-long process. We were lucky enough for like a lot of the people staffing the conference, and myself included, who had participated in just regular MUN conferences. Sermon is one of those. And so we just basically tweaked and copied like the strategies that they'd employed when transitioning their conferences online as well. And so that was a struggle, but it helped. And come conference date, we had like one very big issue at like the conference's start. But once we got past that, things ran much more smoothly. The people that were attending very much enjoyed it. They said they couldn't wait to come back. But it definitely was, having to innovate and move quickly on the fly with all of these different changes and different constraints that were put on us.
I'm hearing a lot of quick adjustments, like quick adjustments being made and all of that. So, Mama, how about you? How did your place of work get affected by the pandemic?
Yeah, so I was teaching as well. I am teaching as well. And we started online. And I think that was a pretty big adjustment because, you can't really control, what students are viewing in their homes or just like how engaged they are. So now that we've kind of transitioned to like a hybrid model, sort of, you can definitely see the holes in like how much students know, or just the differences in the way the students who have stayed online perform versus the ones who are now in person and kind of can get more like face-to-face help. Like Aisha was saying, like it's already difficult enough, like being a teacher, because our education system very much needs a lot of help. But now you're dealing like the whole country doesn't have the infrastructure to deal with the global pandemic. So it's definitely been a change and a shift. And now we're coming to the point where it's like they have to take standardized tests and stuff like that. And a lot of them just don't feel prepared. And it's like there's not really much that the teachers can do about it, or that the people can do about it, because that's just what the state has decided, that these kids have to take their tests. So, yeah.
Sam, I'd like to ask Mama a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Were you teaching prior to COVID as well?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, so this question I like to ask to any of the panelists. For those who were in that same position prior to COVID, did your budget at all change? Like, did you have a bigger budget or a lower budget to work with for your projects?
I mean, I can talk about, I'm a member of our recruitment, retention, and progression to graduation for Hispanic and Latinx student program on campus. Our funding completely was absolved. So this school year, we actually have no money at all, not a penny. We were a part of Kennesaw State University's University College before that was absolved and split among other departments across campus. And so when we came back in the fall, we have no programming and we have no external resources coming into the lounge. We have a student lounge on campus for Latinx and Hispanic students to be able to come and see and hear from people who look and identify with each other. But other than the lounge space, we have nothing like we had before COVID. So I'm working really hard with our program coordinator to find some outside external donors so we can have some money. So in case we ever have a moment where the budget drops again, but that's been definitely really hard. Hopefully the university, I think, is trying to move us under diversity and inclusion. And hopefully we have funding again for fall 21.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, everyone. So we do have time if you want to ask questions as well personally. So I'll start back with Andrew. How were student fees utilized to help you and other students navigate the pandemic?
And Sam, if I may, I would also like Michael to ask his question at this moment, just because that relates perfectly.
Oh, okay,
to
yes, go ahead, Michael. Yeah, I'm reading it, it does, yes.
So Michael, if you just want to unmute yourself.
Thanks. Yes. So I'm from Georgia State University, and there's a lot of stuff that they do to support students. And I wondered what your experience was in terms of your university supporting or not supporting you during COVID.
Yeah. Go ahead, Andrew.
Well, I'll start by stating that I think a lot of the support came from like external sources, specifically at least external, if you want to talk about like just federal legislation. So a lot of the emergency funding that came to students, I know myself, I was a recipient of some of it. I know a bunch of my friends were as well. That money came from CARES 1 and then CARES 2. And that money was then allocated down to the state and then distributed through USG. That kept a lot of students, I guess, attending this university as well, or at least keeping themselves through the school years. That was a very, very significant piece of assistance. Now, in terms of other financial assistance that the university provided, I'm going to be honest and say that it basically stopped with that external support, that student fees were basically used for their typical purposes and weren't really allocated, at least in an innovative way, to any other structures or at least to any other parts of the institution to assist students. And that was a concern to myself when it was occurring. But that's at least what I noticed. I know other KSU students are here as well, and maybe they can speak more favorably of the institution's approach.
Austin, I feel like you have, yes.
Something. So obviously the work that I do with you with civic engagement team is just bringing about awareness to our students that like Andrew said, is bringing awareness like what's going on with federal legislation and state legislation, because it does trickle down through state and local governments. And I really don't feel like students were supported solely by the institution, more so the federal government feeling like they had to pass relief. I think, like Andrew mentioned earlier in the panel today, that the rules to qualify for some things are very, very specific and very limited. And so that can harm students. And, I receive hope, and I've never had to worry about where a meal is coming from the next day, just because of my financial situation with my parents. But I am taking a substantial amount of student loans out. I probably will have 30,000 when I graduate from Kennesaw State. I'm also trying to go to law school, so I don't know where I'm going to find $200,000 from. So it's definitely like during a pandemic. Other than the federal legislation, like Andrew mentioned, I don't think, other than the external resources, that there really were that many offered to us through KSU.
Aisha, yeah. You're muted.
Tiago would tell you that I kept doing that in at our other conference. It's so embarrassing, but thank you. Michael, I wonder, are you a teacher at GSU? Are you a professor there?
Yes, I'm in the neuroscience department at GSU.
Okay. So I felt, I'm going to speak from my teacher's experience. I didn't feel supported as a teacher, and I felt that the school could have done more to make their teachers feel safe, especially being in person. And I would say that I think that they followed the CDC guidelines, and that was pretty much taken care of. But I also feel that it wasn't completely safe for us to be there every single day, 5 days out of the week. And then the students would also they would leave, they'll have their breaks, and they'll travel. So they'll go to the beach, and then they'll come back and they'll tell you about their vacations, and you want to be happy for them, but you're like, did you bring back COVID? So it was it was such an interesting thing. And I felt like, because it's so new, or COVID is still new to all of us, there's no, what is it called? There's no blueprint on what to do. So I feel that everyone is trying to do their best, but as far as support, I didn't feel that the teachers were supported, especially emotionally.
I live in Decatur, and there was a lot of neighborhood pushback because we felt that exactly that the teachers were not supported enough. And it's one of the reasons Decatur school systems took as long as it did to come back, longer than a lot of the other school systems, because the community spoke out against that. Because especially from an emotional and informational perspective, a lot of teachers were not ready.
And I would also say that, so I spent Christmas by myself because I didn't feel safe to go home and spend it with my family, because I was in a classroom full of students who potentially may have had COVID. So it was things like that. And during that time, some of the teachers talked about, like, maybe the school could have given us 2 weeks off, or had us go virtual 2 weeks prior to winter break, but that didn't happen. So whenever the break came, we were forced to, those of us who didn't feel safe to go home, we had to stay, spend time with your family. We had to spend the holiday by ourselves.
There was a lot of Zoom holidays spent. I know, Austin, you had to as well.
I did.
And to caveat that question, how do you feel then the government could have handled students better, students and their finances, and just navigating that? How do you feel how do you all feel? And Mommy, I'll start with you. Could have handled it better if you had a say in wanting to speak to someone and have an opinion. Like, what do you feel could have been better?
Yeah, so I definitely think that just more relief in general, like, could have been given to students. Watching like this whole like uh, stimulus thing, play out, like even as a political science major, like it was very exhausting. Like even as somebody who enjoys, sitting and watching the news and stuff like that. And I think that there was just such a disregard for the fact that people were actually like struggling and, like they didn't have access to the things that they needed on a daily basis. So yeah, just some more consideration for what students are going through, and then overall just like helping them, like more external funds, whatever that might have looked like, just quicker, and obviously like there are implications for that, to our economy and stuff, but I just didn't feel like they cared about students through this entire COVID thing. That's really the biggest thing, is I just didn't feel like they cared. Yeah.
Andrew, same, but what ideas you would have thought that could have been better from our government?
Yeah, I fully echo the sentiments of what Mama brought up. One thing that I'm particularly concerned about, and this is kind of a little bit off topic, but I'm specifically concerned about what financial aid is going to look like for students next year. So a lot of that information that the federal government, or at least state governments, are going to use is based off of tax data from this year, when things are very, very different, and students' financial situations are not what they typically look like. And so, at least looping back, like there was not at least enough flexibility afforded, at least in that regard. So I know that at least this is just like a general recommendation, that probably don't use tax data from this year whenever financial aid is being allocated out and are at least awarded to students. But yeah, I mean, that's a significant concern, at least on my end.
I did not think about that, and that is very true. And it used to be they didn't count this year, they would count the year before, but that changed to say this year. So may have to go back to that, because that is true. A lot of the finances do not reflect households because of this year we've had. What about you, Austin?
I definitely think, the federal government was this last go around, young voter turnout and a lot of, changing tides and flip states and different presidencies. But the earlier stimulus packages during the very beginning of this pandemic wasn't inclusive of adult dependence. And I think that was really struggling for a lot of college students, that it was either file independently and really be on your own, or you don't get anything really. And it was very stressful for a lot of my friends that are not as financially stable as my family is. It was saddening to watch that. I wish that, a lot of more conversations being had at the federal level would have included adult dependence in those earlier stimulus packages. But I also kind of wish, I still am of the personal belief that we probably shouldn't have come back this fall, and held off for a little bit longer, especially in Georgia with the spike numbers of just COVID cases. And so, speaking completely honestly, I really did feel like USG and the government, it was a little irresponsible to kind of just have us all kind of come back, even though we had guidelines and systems set in place. As an RA, I can tell you these students do not wear their masks in our building. And we've tried our best to combat those issues, but we definitely, I think we could have waited another semester and come back in spring or fall. But I'm very hopeful with the vaccine distribution that fall is safe and back to normal. But yeah, I really wish that there would have been a little bit more relief package, like Mama said earlier, that we would have just got more money and help.
That's true. I have a question. I'll start with Aisha. Did at any points you felt like you had to care for a family member or take on extra tasks due to unemployment? And you touched on that just a little bit. And if so, how did this affect your workload?
Absolutely. So since I've graduated, I've worked as a teacher, and now I'm a pod organizer for Powership network. And the jobs the pay is decent, I would say. But I have had to take more financial responsibility in my family, which it's been a challenge. And I also think, I probably shouldn't think this way, but I kind of do, but the what ifs, and I feel the what ifs are scary. Like, what if this happens? And then the person in the family who pays for this is no longer here. And so now you're taking that on. And that's been a thought process of mine as well. So trying to balance that in, that probably ties into a little bit of mental health, but trying to balance that and just working towards something thinking about the finances of my family has been a huge priority of mine this past year.
This is not a question on here, but this is for everyone. Do you feel like, there is this mental health panel going on, but do you all feel like that finances can also cause mental health issues? And not if so, but what are some ways you feel like, and when you start graduating, Andrew, when you graduate, Mama, when you graduate, Austin, when you graduate and you start seeking job opportunities, do you feel like this pandemic can potentially hinder your upward mobility and after graduation? And Andrew, you can go first.
I was going to say most definitely. A lot of the plan of myself and like a lot of my other friends were, of course, to get summer internships, or at least internships in the spring. And yeah, a lot of those things got locked down. They were rolled back. I know one of my big internship plans for the summer, they're not even offering that anymore, or at least it doesn't look like they are. Just have been repeatedly checking on that. And so at least in regard to like political science majors as well, a lot of the DC internships, the way that those like look at the moment is that because a lot of them are virtual, you're competing with people all across the country who are going to every other university across the country as well. And so it makes actually getting those internships much more difficult than it typically was in the past, especially considering that, again, like the number of internships are limited, and now the ones that are left, you're competing with, an entire country worth of other college students. And so that's, I think, like a situation that at least poli-sci kids here at KSU, and I assume other universities here in the state as well, have encountered.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. What about you, Mama?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing in terms of like upward mobility is just the lack of experiences that a lot of students are going to have. Like Andrew is saying, like, all these internships got canceled, or even the ones that got put online, like they're just not the same in terms of the hands-on experience that you would have gotten if you got to be there in person. And so I think that a lot of like resumes of people who are graduating these next few years are going to kind of be lacking. Which is definitely gonna impede on a lot of the plans the students have moving forward. So,
Austin?
I will say that I was very fortunate, even in the height of the pandemic in this past fall semester. I did a lot of community outreach and volunteering with the Ossoff and Warnock Senate campaigns, and it really helped me get started in the political science department here at Kennesaw State. But I'm definitely struggling to even decide where I want to intern. I definitely feel these online internships is like everybody said before, it's just not the same experience. Political science is very hands-on and very demanding and very wide-ranging. There's just so many places that we can go. And they're all very different. And so I'm struggling personally to figure out where I want to go in the world of like politics. Like, do I want to write policy or do I want to analyze it? Or do I want to work for somebody or do I want people to work for me? Like, do I want to run for office like straight out of undergrad or law school? It's just a very much thing. And finances right now with internships and finding a position with my undergraduate degree afterwards really does stress me out about law school. I don't know. Hopefully I get a good offer from a law school. Um, but yeah, definitely internships. Our major, most of us, I think, are political science on this Zoom. We can all agree, like, it's hard and it's ever changing. But I think right now, in the upcoming year, there's a bunch of opportunities. Hopefully, I will say that our experiences may be different, but I don't think they're lacking. I think they're just very uniquely different. I think we'll be able to talk in interviews and on our resumes for years to come about how we were able to manage this crisis and this global health pandemic and create innovative solutions that we had never had to come up with before. So there's a silver lining to every kind of negative situation. And this is probably the largest negative situation any of us are probably going to face in our lifetime. But we definitely have been able to create solutions that are very unique and to this time.
Absolutely. Thank you all for sharing. And last question before we open up for like open discussion and Tiago, you can share some thoughts as well. How has it been balancing class? Well, actually, I have a question. Actually, let me wind back. I have a question for Aisha. So is Powership a nonprofit organization or is it an organization that gets donor funded? And if so, how do you feel like working for them have shifted during the pandemic versus things they've done in the past?
So the answer is they're a nonprofit. The conference was sponsored by different organizations like Sierra Club, and I believe North Face is also a sponsor. And I only started working for them during their nonprofit, so I'm not quite sure what it looked like prior to COVID.
Okay, thank you. Just wondering, how has it been balancing classes and working? And when I say working, that includes involvement as well. Your involvement, work, all of that. How has it been during this pandemic? And please share your honest opinions. Mama.
It's been very different for me. When I was in like high school and even like the beginning part of my college career, I didn't really like work a ton because my parents were kind of against like doing school and work at the same time. But then, COVID hit and a lot like financially changed, and so now I'm in 6 classes and I have multiple jobs, multiple involvement, and it has been an adjustment to say the least. Like, yeah, very, very difficult. And at the same time, like while you're in school and working on these jobs, like you're also trying to, apply to grad schools. Like just, it has been like probably the most like mentally draining season, I guess, of my life that I've been in so far. But at the same time, despite all the craziness and stuff, I do appreciate like the opportunity that I have to be able to work and still go to school, because I know that a lot of people haven't been afforded that opportunity. Yeah, but it's definitely been a crazy, crazy, crazy adjustment, and I'm very, very, very ready for it to be over. Very ready.
Am I allowed to ask a question?
I'm on mute. Yes, go ahead.
I was going to say, Professor Black, you mentioned here that Georgia State also helps student organizations transition to online to keep doing events and allowing students to use the web conferencing platforms. What exactly did that look like? I know, just for for comparison, KSU has this student organization platform called Owl Life. UI on it, it's not very good. I know they're tweaking that at the moment. But I did actually want to ask, so what is, if Georgia State has a similar platform, what does that look like? And I guess, how did they actually execute that transition that you allude to?
So Georgia State uses WebEx, which is a Cisco product. And I'll be honest, I find it very clunky. Zoom's much better. It's getting better now. It's catching up to Zoom, but it works. And it works fairly well. And so all students had access to WebEx immediately. And they also sent out to student organizations to say, hold off on your budgets because we're going to hit a rough road ahead. This was in March when everybody closed down. And we probably are going to refund money to students. So you won't have that student fee money going to organizations. So know that that's coming, because we're probably going to refund you money for student fees. But then that means that student organizations won't have that money that would come from student fees. And then they sent out a thing that said, you should look at transitioning. We hope we're going to be back in the fall. We thought we'd be back in the fall. We were kind of, sort of. I mean, you guys experienced that too. Some classes, yes, some classes, no. But they said, here's something you can use and be thinking about that transition, which I thought was great. One of the things financially that they did that I thought was awesome was they immediately started an emergency assistance fund and asked all the professors to kick in money for it so that students that were really hurting financially could be supported, and offered technology to students that didn't have it. So if a student didn't have a laptop or Wi-Fi, if we were going to online, they got that, which I thought was fantastic.
Thank you, Michael. Austin, how is balancing classes and working during the pandemic?
It has been a struggle. I'm a person that, I'm very people oriented. I'm very out there all the time. I'm never, this is a very rare case where you'll see me in my apartment. I'm never here. And I have a problem telling people no. So I tend to overextend myself, and then class, deadlines don't move. So they're pretty firm. And so, you have to meet them. I mean, I'm not any different than any other student. I have the ability to get my work done. And a lot of our professors, especially this year, have been so understanding that we're people and life happens. And I think that's really important in our balance as college students. I believe in the good in people. So I definitely hope that moving forward in professional careers after this, that people remember life happens, and there are going to be days of the balance. For me, schoolwork takes my weekends, because my Monday through Friday is doing organization work at the school with SET, Civic Engagement Team, or SGA, or anything else. I volunteer a lot off campus as well with some nonprofits, Social Change Atlanta. And so it does get hard some days to just remember that you're here to get a degree. And so definitely that. And I did some quick research because I remember hearing back to the balancing work. According to CNBC, 8 out of 10 college students that are undergrads actually are working while trying to make ends meet. And so it definitely is a struggle for a lot of people, because it is a stress, and that mental health stressor of just making it through. And that goes back up to federal legislation and state costs of education and everything. And so hopefully I can make my changes to that system in the future. But yes, it's been a struggle, to say the least.
Yes, thank you. And I did see the broadcast message, Tiago. Thank you. And it's 3:40 and I want to open the floor for thoughts and opinions more so about what are you looking forward to from here on out? Like we had a pause and made us rethink and relating this to sustainable development goals, relating finances to sustainable goals. What are your thoughts for here and to the future? And I'll start with you, Aisha, as we wrap up.
And I'll also like to quickly clarify the question about do I have to take care of a family due to their unemployment? The answer to that question is no, but becoming financially independent, which is something that we're supposed to be doing at my age, has been a problem because I feel that job stability is not a thing anymore. And also I feel like that there's additional health cost that wasn't there prior to COVID. So that's that. And can you repeat the question, Sarah?
Before I will repeat that before, and to Andrew's point about internships, I think same go for jobs too. People who didn't think they would be laid off were laid off. Like you got the job, you got your career, you got your dream job, you went to college, and all of a sudden you're laid off. So absolutely, job stability looks completely different now, like going in and it's like, well, did I just waste my 4 years getting my career job just to hear that there's not enough funding to keep me there? So absolutely understand. My question was, what does connecting this panel to the sustainable development goals, there's 17 of them, like what do you foresee happening from here on out? Like if you wanted to see a world, of course 2030 is the goal to achieve 17 sustainable development goals. Knowing no one could have anticipated this pandemic when constructing these goals. And so is it still 2030? What are we looking for towards the future?
The way that I see it and the way that I connect finance to the SDGs, my hope is that there is a more quality education in terms of getting the resources to people and helping them understand that this is a resource and this is how you use the resource. Because I feel like the paperwork that Austin and Mama and Andrew were talking about, like you read the paperwork and you see the documents and you're like, I don't qualify for that. But if there's someone in your circle who's like, no, like you do qualify, you just have to word it this way in order to get the money. So I feel that the quality education and just helping people understand that there are resources out there to help you if you are able to recognize a resource.
Thank you.
Can I interrupt for just a sec?
Oh, go ahead, Michael.
To follow up on what she just said, one of the programs that I'm most proud of at Georgia State is the Panther retention grants, which basically drop money into student accounts if they can't cover their full tuition. It doesn't ask them, it doesn't have them apply, it just happens. So if they're just a little bit short and they're going to get dropped because they're just a little bit short, like magic appears and suddenly they have that covered. And I think that program is great because there's a lot of students at Georgia State that either don't have the time to go and find that, don't have the networks to know about it, and are just trying to make it and get by. And they might be like $500 short, but that $500 kicks them out of the university because they can't cover tuition. And then to have that just magically drop in there is a great program.
Wow, that is amazing. Absolutely. And Austin, yes, go ahead.
Shocked. That's a wonderful program. And I hopefully now hearing about that can advocate for something like that at KSU. That's definitely something that I am passionate about, of like reaching out to high school seniors coming into college that have parents that are working 3 jobs or 2 jobs, and they're home from 11 p.m. to 2 in the morning and they didn't go to college. And so they don't know how to help their student with FAFSA, or they don't they never went to a post-secondary institution or a 4-year degree. They did a 2-year program. And so students who come here who are barely trying to make it don't have the time or resources to access those forms or that information. It is very hard. I'm learning like how to manage my own bank account on my phone, and it is very awfully hard and difficult to budget, and it's things that you just have to learn. But it would help if there are people there. Relating back to the sustainable development goals, 2030 is a big reach. I think it was always a very big reach, but I think if we all work together, I'm into politics and federal legislation, and there's ideas out there. There are Green New Deal proposals and things of that nature out there, and maybe that's not the complete correct answer, but things like zero hunger, clean water and sanitation, that looks like what the president right now is talking about with removing lead pipes with that our drinking water is coming from. But it takes us telling our peers what's actually happening and what's being proposed. And that's why I really value my time with our civic engagement team at Kennesaw State, because it's just our sole job to tell people what's happening. Because a lot of times when you're struggling financially and you're trying to make it through classes, I'm not going to take the 5 minutes I have of free time to go and look into what policy is being introduced on the House floor if I am struggling to pay my bills. It's just not something a lot of people are into or are aware of. And so it's definitely, I think 2030 is a big reach. I think a few years later, I hope that we can get there. I hope that, we reach the quality education and the no poverty and zero hunger. But this pandemic, I think, definitely put a nail in there. And it's probably going to extend this process by, I think, another decade or so. But it just takes all of us working together and just remembering that, with our finances, there's some things that I realize that I'm doing that are not the most energy efficient or the most green practices. And so if you're going to convince people to change their whole lifestyles, you kind of have to lead by example. And so I'm trying to reroute. So if you have any ways that I can be greener, definitely send them in the chat box.
Thank you, Austin. And quickly, Andrew, and then we have 2 minutes. So take a minute, and then Mama take a minute, and then we'll close out.
Gonna briefly say this is where my MUN experience, I guess, comes in handy, because all we do is at least 90% of what we talk about are the SDGs. But for 8, 9, and 10, just briefly reviewing them, I think going forward, there are reasons to be optimistic with at least the current state of, the global economy. I just speaking generally, to where I think you're going to see a lot of different new investment tactics, especially in the wake of all of this. I'm speaking very, very generally and not very articulately, so I apologize. But I think that at least you're going to see a lot of that money. You're going to see different tactics, at least in the way that new infrastructure is built up. Because with the way that things were, there was a fear that it was going to be a very, very significant recession in the wake of the pandemic, and at least I think successfully to an extent. There was a pause that was put on the economy, and now things are reopening back up and the economy's starting again. I think you're going to see a lot of growth coming into next year, and it's a matter of how that growth and at least those different revenues are actually allocated. Again, not speaking very articulately and not speaking very generally, but I think there are reasons to be optimistic, at least with the state of things going forward.
Sam, you're muted. But I think, yeah, Mama, you can go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I think my thing with the SDGs and just the pandemic in general is that I feel like the pandemic has really done a good job of showing us kind of the disparities between certain communities and their lack of access to quality education and water and food and stuff like that. And so I hope, I agree with Austin that 2030 is definitely a little bit of a reach. But I do hope that, that what the pandemic has shown us, that there's attention drawn to that, and a lot of the, things that people have been ignoring before the pandemic hit, they can now focus on those. So, yeah.
Thank you all so much. And I'll ask, please feel free to share what you learned in the bigger chat as we close in a minute. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I've learned and gleaned from you all. Thank you, Michael, for dropping some great gems in the chat. And so if you would like to, we're going to take like 5 minutes in the bigger chat to kind of just talk about what we all have learned in this group from each other. And see you all there.